Welcome to Season 8 of Radio Free 501c, brought to you by Rogue Tulips Consulting. Don't forget to subscribe or follow us. We're in Season 8 and we still have a lot to talk about. Radio Free 501c is supported by USAE News, the weekly community newspaper of Association CVBs and hotels. Learn more at usaenews.com. We're continuing our celebration of AANHPI Month this May with a first-time guest. It's Mark Franco. He's a partner at Rimon Law, and he's here to talk with us about Gong Fu and professional practice. It's Monday, May 11th, 2026. Welcome to episode 328. Hey, everybody. We are well into the month of May. I hope you are enjoying springtime here on planet Earth. At least here in the Western Hemisphere, we're having springtime. And thank you for taking time out of your busy week to join us for this week's episode of Radio Free 501c. I'm your host, Cecilia Sepp. My company, Rogue Tulips Consulting, supports this podcast with our podcast partner, USAE News. If you would like to learn more about USAE News, go to their website, conveniently named usaenews.com. We also want to thank USAE News for giving us a free subscription to share with our podcast guests. So thank you for that, USAE News. And this week we have a first-time guest. A friend of mine from the ASAE Ethics Committee is joining us. Although he's not currently serving on that committee this year, he's still very involved in all things association. Mark Franco is here to talk with us about the practice of Gong Fu in our personal and professional activities. But before we dive into that topic, Mark, welcome to the show. I'm so glad you're here. Would you like to say hello to the audience and tell us a little about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Cecilia. And it's really great to be with you. Hi, all. Again, my name is Mark Franco. I'm a partner with the Rimon Law Firm, and I work with many tax-exempt nonprofit organizations, including a significant number of associations. I got to know Cecilia through some of our work together, volunteering for ASAE. I'm really happy to be here.
Oh, that's great. And I'm so glad you're here, Mark. I've always enjoyed working with you and hearing your thoughts and insights on many of the different topics related to association management. But today we're talking about something a little bit different, and people who know me know I'm a little bit different myself. So I love talking about different topics. And today we're talking about Gong Fu, which in English we sometimes call Kung Fu. But I do know that it's closer to Gong Fu. So can you explain to the audience what that means?
Yeah. So, when we think of that term Gong Fu or Kung Fu, as it's sort of better known here in the West, we tend to think of the martial arts fighting techniques. And actually, I'm a black belt in what's called Jiao Ga Shaolin Kung Fu. It's a mix of northern Shaolin boxing, and southern kicking style. And I studied that for about 6 or 7 years. But as part of studying that martial art, I came to learn that Kung Fu doesn't actually only mean martial arts fighting. So Kung Fu is really the practice of discipline and hard work to achieve a certain level of skill. And so, what I've tried to communicate sometimes with folks is that you can really have Kung Fu in anything, right? You have really great Kung Fu in podcasting, right? I try to have good Kung Fu when it comes to being an attorney. And so this is something that you can apply in all kinds of things, right? Whether it's, some sort of sport or musical instrument or public speaking or whatever it is that you're trying to be better at. One way to approach it is to try and have good Kung Fu in it.
Oh, I love that. You reminded me, Mark, of one of my favorite yoga teachers. Well, I studied at home using DVDs. So one of my favorite yoga teachers to watch on DVD and practice was Suzanne Deason. And she talked about how certain warrior poses help us learn focus and discipline. Now, of course, yoga is not about fighting, but we do have a lot of warrior poses in that. And that brings up another thing I like to think about is that the warrior's greatest battle is the internal one with ourselves. So how does Gong Fu apply to that internal discipline and work?
Yeah. So, I think even more so in sort of today's environment, people may be rushing through sort of something, or they may be going through it sort of in a not very thoughtful way. They're just going through the motions. And what Kung Fu is really about is what you're talking about with that warrior pose. It's about inner reflection, trying to understand what you're trying to achieve, and being better each time that you're doing it, right? When I practiced the martial art of Kung Fu, without fail, every class we would go through certain foundational elements, right? Something like, when you hear how they practice karate, right? They have kata, which they have to do, which are like certain movements that they do all the time, which are the basis. They're the foundational teachings for some of the more complex techniques. We have the same thing in Kung Fu martial arts. We have these foundational forms that we learn that teach you the basics, like a basic stance, or a basic fighting form, or a basic move with your hands to block. We have those things that we work at regularly as a prerequisite to be able to move over onto some of the more complex stuff. But then even when we're doing the complex stuff, we're always going back to those basic things and practicing them also. And so I think, you can apply that in everything, right? Maybe for example, when I practice law, maybe I can give sort of very nuanced counsel on a particular topic, but I go back and make sure, as a foundational thing, that I've answered the question that the client has asked, that I've communicated in a way that sort of fulfills their other expectations in terms of timing and those kinds of things. And so I really think that there's a more thoughtful way of an approach, whether you're in your professional activities or you're just doing something personal. I think these kinds of thoughtful approaches they're really useful, and they embody the approach that Kung Fu wants you to have.
And I'm so glad you brought that up, Mark, about the foundational lessons that we have to learn, and so that we can apply them. I'm what I like to call a jock gone bad. I used to play a lot of sports growing up. So we had to go to practice, and we would practice things over and over again so that when we were actually in the game, we would perform to our best. Even if we didn't win, we could do our best, because not everybody wins every time. But you're also, just to make this a little more relatable for the audience, because most of us have never studied any level of martial art. We maybe see it in the movies, like The Karate Kid. And when you think about that relationship between Mr. Miyagi and Daniel, and how he had him do those tasks over and over and over again so that they would become like muscle memory. And that's the second part of my question, because I think this is very important, especially in the study of martial arts and why we do it, is that relationship with the teacher, who is also called, and I may say it incorrectly, so I apologize, Sifu, that teacher-student relationship and mentoring that person. So what do we get out of that, Mark, that we can apply to our daily life?
Yeah. And first, let me say, Karate Kid is one of my all-time favorite movies. I mean, probably top five. Um, if it's on TV, I'll watch it, and my wife will say, "You're watching that again?" I'm saying, "Of course, I'm watching this again." I mean, like every element of that movie is perfect. And to your point, there's that scene where they're doing a little sparring, and Daniel says to Mr. Miyagi, he says, "When am I going to learn how to punch?" And Mr. Miyagi says, "First learn block, then learn punch." Right. And so, it's really interesting when you think about that and how it applies to martial arts, but then also how you can apply it to your own things that you want to do. I mean, there's certain things that you have to learn. For attorneys, there's certainly client interaction, right? Nobody's going to take counsel from you if you are sort of somebody that doesn't communicate,
Mhm.
right? It's going to be very hard to get your legal perspective across if you can't even keep them engaged just in simple conversation. You also talked about the role of the teacher, the sifu. And so we were fortunate enough to have our Grand Master come over from China and visit us one trip. And the lesson that I remember the most significantly from his trip had nothing to do with Kung Fu. What he told me, so one day we asked him, we said, sort of, what is the one thing that you would like us to take away from our ability to interact with you during this trip? And he said, and I always sort of keep this close to my heart. He says, it doesn't matter how good the level of your Kung Fu is if you're not a good person, right? And so that's something that I've always tried to apply personally. But I did a webinar a few months back, and it was about how you can apply nonprofit director duties to your own personal life. And a couple of things that I talked about there, I think, relate to this piece of our conversation. So first, you asked about a mentor. As a nonprofit director, you're allowed to rely on experts. And so I think it's really important that you not only have that in your professional activities, but also for yourself personally, right? You have somebody that you can talk to that may have a little bit more experience than you. Maybe that's a mentor, maybe that's a teacher, maybe that's just a trusted friend, or your spouse, even, that you really like the way they look at things, right?
Yes.
The other thing that I like to apply as a nonprofit director is, you should always be reasonably informed. And you can't be informed unless you're reading things or you're talking to somebody. And so,
Right.
a lot of what I always advise people to do is to talk to more than just one person, talk to several people, get lots of perspectives. And that always, in my experience, always generally leads to a better outcome.
Mhm. Oh, exactly. I'm so glad you related that to the role of a board member, a director, and that focus and discipline, which is what we get from studying martial arts or playing sports and trying to do our best. But I also love The Karate Kid, and I'm a huge fan of the Netflix series Cobra Kai,
Yes.
which was really good.
Yes. Yeah.
Because to your point about it doesn't matter how good your Gong Fu is if you're not a good person, because we saw in that character that ran the Cobra Kai school in the original
Yeah.
Karate
Johnny.
Kid movie. Yes, he was a bad person, and
Yeah.
so there were bad outcomes from
Yeah.
that because it came from a place of anger and violence. And we saw at the end of the first season of the Cobra Kai series what happens when
Yeah.
that is fueled by anger and
Yeah.
violence and resentment and revenge as opposed to using it for good. Uh,
Yeah.
I'm I'm also a fan of the old television series Kung Fu with David Carradine because his character very much embodied that
Yeah.
calm that comes from that sort of discipline. So, do you find that you get an inner state of calm on a regular basis because you practice Kung Fu?
Yeah. So unfortunately, I don't have much time to practice it now. But, anytime I think you introduce a certain level of discipline to whatever you're doing, it's helpful, right? You talked about not being a good person. Uh, in my experience, you know, having chaos, it's way more energy draining than it is having calm, like a calm, disciplined environment, right? And so I think it's just naturally, there's an advantage to having a calm, disciplined approach. Um, but talking about Cobra Kai, one of my favorite characters, so I also love that show. One of my favorite characters he was the bad guy in Karate Kid 2, right? He was the subordinate of the rival master to Mr.
Mhm.
Miyagi. And
Yeah.
in Cobra Kai, he turns out to be the total opposite. He's a guy that changed his perspective and actually became a good friend to Daniel. And for me, became one of the most beloved characters, in that show. And I think it's because um, people want to root. Like it's way easier to support and root for folks where you see they are trying to do good things in this world, or they try to approach things from a good place. So again, maybe that's just the perspective that we were brought up in, but I think naturally, um, it just makes sense to take these approaches, and I always believe that they'll lead to better outcomes.
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree with that. And Johnny's one of my favorite characters too. And in the original Karate Kid movie series, I had a lot of sympathy for Johnny because I really felt like he was a person who had lost his way and
Yeah.
connected with the wrong mentors.
Yes.
And, and then we see, as you said in the series Cobra Kai, he almost had become frozen in the 80s
Yeah.
because he just stopped moving forward. And I think some of that, maybe I'm making up a backstory, but some of that was he quit practicing his martial
Yes.
arts so
Yeah.
much. And then he kind of reconnected with it, and it led him to become a better mentor and a very out of the box mentor, which I also loved. His training sequences, if you've never seen, to the audience, if you've never seen the series Cobra Kai, Johnny's training sequences are hysterical because he has them
Mm.
do all kinds of crazy things like running inside of a concrete mixer truck and things like that. So he's very out of the box too, and just trying to really connect with people again. And I think that some of that is that confidence you get from studying a martial art. I did not have kids, but I always thought if I do have kids, I want them to study a martial art so they get that confidence and that focus and that discipline, not so they can fight with people,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
so that they can get that focus. Because I think that's really what we need. And to your point that you've been making throughout the conversation, Mark, that focus, that discipline that we get when we're doing our work is really what helps us to do it well, do it consistently, and then
Yeah.
to excel at it. And I call it mental yoga. I have not done a regular yoga practice for a number of years now, but I do what I call my mental yoga because
Mhm.
I learned so much from the practice of it. I will just remind myself of some of the things. So do you find yourself doing that throughout the day, like taking that moment and thinking of a lesson like the one you shared from the Grand Master?
Yeah, absolutely. A really good example of this is I was just so I spent this past weekend. I spent it um, 2 hours away at a tennis clinic that
Oh,
I you know I arranged with a bunch of the guys that I play tennis with. So there's about 8 of us. We were hanging out. We spent all weekend playing tennis. And the oldest guy, he's somebody that's been retired for some time, but he doesn't sit around in retirement. So he's a avid tennis player, and you could argue that he's the most fit out of all of us. He's always playing tennis or always doing something. And it's because he's intentional about trying to continue to meet a goal in his tennis,
mhm.
right? And so um, I've seen it the other way, where in retirement, folks kind of don't really know what to do, and they aren't doing anything, and you can see it manifest itself in maybe the way they interact with you. Maybe they're not as happy. Maybe they're not as physically well off. And I think it's because they just kind of have that lack of focus, or potentially, I'm not saying this always applies to everybody, but maybe there's a lack of focus, or maybe there's a lack of intention in trying to do things that are good for you. So, I think that it really helps. It really helps to be intentional, whether it's for 5 seconds a day, where, like, 5 to 10 seconds, you sort of try and reset yourself and be intentional about what you're going to do next. Or if you're like this guy, Steve, who's intentional about playing 2 hours of tennis every other day, because it's that kind of sport is really good for you in terms of both mental and physical well-being.
And what's good about tennis is you really have to think. I
You
played
have to
tennis when
think.
I was young, and I always loved it, and I used to love to watch tennis, but you really have to think, and there's a
You
certain
do.
amount of strategy depending on who
Absolutely.
you're playing, right? So, and I will support 100% what you said about people who retire without a plan. A lot of data shows that if you have no plan and no intention, you do decline, and you decline
Mm-hmm.
more rapidly. You
Mm-hmm.
physically decline, you mentally decline. And so you
Mm-hmm.
need to have some level of activity and commitment to something, whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is. People who garden tend to live healthier longer because they're outside, they're doing something,
Mm-hmm.
they see the results of their work.
Mm-hmm.
So you really need to do that. And I really, for myself personally, have no intention of retiring. I will always be doing something. I
Mm-hmm.
will always have a project going. I will always have a plan. I will always be involved in something, and
Mm-hmm.
as we're all
Mm-hmm.
getting older, we do need to kind of step aside and let the younger generations come forward and have their day in the sun. And that's an intentional activity as well. We have to know that where we are in our life cycle, and we need
Yeah.
to accept that.
Yeah.
Like we all eventually, hopefully, will become a village elder and kind of be there to offer advice and that mentoring. And that's where I think Gong Fu and these principles you've been talking about are really very helpful to us all through our life, not just when we're young, but when we're older. And I think when we're older, these principles have more meaning and we can apply them in a different way, and maybe even in a better way, because we have life experience and we
Yeah.
know when we're
Mm-hmm.
distracted. And you said chaos, and I'm like, oh my gosh, Mark saw my desk this morning because it's chaos. My husband walked in my office one day and said, how do you find anything? And I'm like, that's a good question. Because I have so many things going on. There's papers everywhere and folders and piles, and I'm constantly sifting through the piles, though. So I always joke with them and say, well, it's really more like a tell it, an archaeological dig. You just have to go down a little bit and find out what's going on. But so when it comes to the term martial arts, is we call it that in the West because to us it looks like it's about fighting, even though it's really not. Is other than like Gong Fu or like I think it's Jeet Kune Do, which is what
Mm-hmm.
Bruce Lee created,
Right.
his version of it, and his was a lot about not fighting.
Yes.
It was
Yeah.
really. So do you have any thoughts about that? About
Yeah. Yeah. So this, I think when you actually practice Kung Fu, you receive the what's a consistent message from all our teachers, which is that martial arts is for self-defense. And even Mr. Miyagi says this in The Karate Kid. He says karate is for self-defense only, right? So really, martial arts, I think, um, is intended to just provide confidence. It's to provide a certain level of ability, and it's to provide knowledge of how to uh, conduct yourself in certain situations, right? Doesn't always have to be a um, physical situation. You know, when I practice martial arts, they said the number one self-defense technique is to leave,
oh.
right? It's
Yeah.
not even a martial art. It's just to extract yourself from the circumstance.
Hmm.
And so I think you'll find that pretty common amongst most teachers. Now, maybe you'll have a rogue teacher like the guy that was the teacher of Cobra Kai and Karate Kid, who taught martial arts as a form to intimidate people. But I think for the most part, it's really about developing a certain level of confidence to be able to navigate through really hard situations.
Hmm. And that is excellent advice too. The best way to avoid a fight is not to get in one.
Yeah,
And the best
yeah,
way to avoid a confrontation is to walk away from it. And you just reminded me of something my father taught me when I was really young. He had been a Marine in World War II, so he knew how to fight.
hmm,
And he taught my sisters and I how to do defensive boxing, meaning
hmm,
like how to block if somebody's
right,
trying to attack us. And then he
right,
said, you block it, maybe you throw a punch and then you run away as fast as
yeah,
you can
yeah,
because you don't want to
yeah,
get in a fight with
yeah,
somebody. But if you have to defend yourself, that's what you do. And his also, I have three brothers, and he said, your brothers and I are not always going to be around. And that's why I'm teaching you this.
mm.
And so, excellent advice. I always remembered it
Well,
because,
the other thing, let me say this too, what we're taught, or at least what I was taught when I learned martial arts is you don't really win a fight. So we get accustomed to watching fighting as a sport, so let's take the UFC, for example. Somebody
oh, yeah.
gets knocked out, the ref steps in and the fight is over. That might not happen in a street fight,
Right.
right? If you get knocked out, they could continue to beat on you. They could take out a weapon and do something else to you. If you're a female, they may take advantage of you. So you shouldn't, you should understand that street fighting, it's not anything like the fighting that you see on TV, even like the stylized fighting that we see in movies or TV series. You might not get out of a fight unscathed. And if that's the case, you didn't really win, right? Because we don't want to be injured. I mean, ever. So I think one of the realities that I learned is that you just want to avoid fighting. Even though you're trained to fight, you just want to avoid it as much as possible because you
That's,
never know what might happen to you.
see, that's such a good point. And, again, having three older brothers, I would sometimes see them get in fights because,
Yeah,
they were teenagers and you know how
sure.
boys are, they get in fights.
Yeah.
And it was messy. People getting hit with rocks, people getting their head banged on the sidewalk. It's not
Hmm.
pretty like in the movie. Sure, absolutely right. And reminds me one of my other favorite movies, Roadhouse, which actually has a lot of philosophy in it because the main character that Patrick Swayze plays says that no one wins a fight.
Yeah,
because he has to
that's
go to the
right.
emergency room because he had been in a fight in the roadhouse where he's working and he had gotten cut with a knife and he had to go get stitches. And the
Hmm.
doctor looked at his body and saw the scars and said, "Do you ever win a fight?" And that was his response. No one wins a fight,
Hmm.
because you don't. If you're fighting, you've already lost because you've lost control of the situation.
Exactly.
But sometimes we have to use force to stop someone from hurting other people.
Yes.
And there's a difference between force and violence. And I
Yeah,
think
that's right.
martial arts focuses on the use of force and energy because, like, we've mentioned Jeet Kune Do, which was Bruce Lee's school that he created, and his was all about redirecting energy in a lot of ways. And in English, it loosely translates to way of the intercepting fist, meaning
Hmm.
you're stopping it, you're not encouraging it, and you're
Hmm.
not throwing another thing. So, is there a term that you wish we used instead of martial arts?
Um, I think it's just so common. Uh, it's hard to think of something that might work better. But certainly, what would be good for folks to sort of understand from our conversation today is that Kung Fu really isn't just about. It's not about fighting. It's if you can try and achieve Kung Fu in almost everything you do, I think you'll have a really good approach to whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish.
Well, and what got you interested in studying Gong Fu?
Well, I've always been into physical activity. So, growing up, I played lots of tennis, baseball, basketball, and it just seemed like another type of challenge, right? And I did also find an appeal in being able to be more confident in certain situations. I myself don't like confrontation, so you know, it was always um, it was always my intention to try and avoid fighting whenever possible. But to the extent that maybe, like you said, I needed to either defend myself or somebody else, that I had some knowledge or ability to do that.
And so, well, you mentioned you had a black belt. So, do you get to
Yeah.
keep that forever, or
Yes.
so
You,
you
you,
don't have to keep testing for that?
well, you don't have to keep testing, but so it's an achievement, kind of like it's not a certification, it's more like a certificate. Um, but what was really fun about the process to black belt is I got to learn so many cool things. So I got to learn different, uh, they called forms, so fighting forms. So I got to learn the tiger claw form, which is you're striking with the palm of your hand, and then at the end you're raking with your nails. That's the tiger palm technique, or the tiger claw technique. I also learned how to fight with a Chinese straight sword. I learned with a Chinese broadsword. I learned how to fight with a um, sort of a long spear. And so, that kind of stuff, that's always intrigued me. And I just, it's kind of really interesting, and it's fun to be able to say that you learn those things.
Mhm. Well, and how exciting though to be exposed to that, and to learn those new things, like actually how you use a weapon and how heavy a weapon actually is.
Yeah,
Because again, in the movies you've mentioned, that's not what it's really like. Weapons are actually very heavy, and
yeah,
that's why you have to
yeah,
practice with them quite a lot. So like if anybody's ever seen like Xena Warrior Princess and how she's flipping that sword around all the time,
yeah,
it's like
yeah.
that's because it's a prop sword. Real swords are heavy. You would not be able to do that.
That's
And
right. That's right.
yeah, and
Well,
different. Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I would say sort of a practical way to bring this back to everybody is that learning all of those techniques, what you're really taught is how to use the tool that you have on hand,
Mm,
right? Because you wouldn't fight with a straight sword the same way you would fight with a spear, right? All the techniques with a spear are about keeping somebody at a distance from you and not getting into close combat. Whereas with a straight sword, you want them a little bit closer, obviously, because the sword is shorter. And then even the difference between a straight sword and a broadsword. So a broadsword, all the techniques are slashing, right? You're really using the weight of the weapon to your advantage. Whereas with a straight sword, you're using the tip more than you are using the blade, right? You're trying to, it's more of like a thrusting. Many techniques are a thrusting motion. So I think when you think about how to apply that professionally or personally, it's how can you achieve success in any particular situation with what you have to work with, right? And so that, I think that's maybe something that people who aren't practicing martial arts can kind of adopt, that, that sort of philosophy to the things that they're doing.
Right. You use what you have on hand, but also make sure you know how to use it.
You know how to use it.
I think that's really the lesson there, because especially your comparison between a straight sword and a broadsword, and how you use them. I mean, you don't stab with a broadsword. So if you don't know that, that could
right.
work against you.
Right.
But also you remind me of another martial artist I liked watching the movies, which is Cynthia Rothrock, because she uses anything she can get her hands on to get, catch people and subdue them. So I saw her in one of her movies, she hit somebody with a freezer door. It's like just open the freezer and smacked them in the face. So it's like, to your point, use what you've got and use it well, use it to your advantage. And also, this leads us to thinking outside the box. Like, we talk a lot about being creative, being innovative in our work. So look at something in a different way. And that's another thing that studying Gong Fu or applying Gong Fu principles in our thinking can help us do, because it's everything from a lawyer finding a case that maybe hasn't been cited for 35 years. And you say, oh, I found this case and it relates, because you're thinking differently about it and looking at different case law, or finding a different way to use a piece of equipment. Like my husband and I, we like to repurpose things we already have. So instead of buying a lot of new things, like we use a piece of furniture in a different way, or whatever it is we need to do. And then understanding how your technology works, because as we all know, software packages are chock full of all kinds of stuff we don't even know about. So trying to learn that is a really good thing. But I would, this has been a great conversation, and I hate to wrap it up because I could talk about these concepts like for another 3 hours. But I did want to ask you, do you really believe that your Gong Fu studies have made you a better attorney?
Absolutely. And so I'll just sort of, try and encapsulate it in this way. When you're taught martial arts, again, you're sort of taught these foundational techniques, but then part of how you're examined is you have to put them into practice. And so when we would do that, we wouldn't go out there. So there's two portions of the test. They teach you, they examine the form. So you would go out there and do the form, but then you would have to apply it to somebody's attack. And if somebody's attacking you, I'm not going to go out there and do the form, right? I'm going to take the foundational elements and adapt it to the specific attack that's coming at me. I think the same thing in my professional career as a lawyer. There are certain things that I've learned in terms of trying to help somebody with a legal issue. Some of the foundational things are, responding timely, right, to somebody's question, making sure that they know that I've heard their concern and are working on it. Making sure that I've clearly communicated certain things about whatever it is, the issue that they're having. But then the adaptation part is trying to figure out whether it's case law or whether there's language in the actual statutes themselves, or whether there's a similar situation that another client experienced that I could take elements of that and apply to help resolve the matter at hand. It's really about having that strong foundation and the ability to adapt that to whatever situation it is that you're facing.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes, I agree 100%. I say, oh my goodness, people might wonder, like, why is a grown woman saying, oh my goodness? That's because I'm a huge Shirley Temple fan. And that's what she would always say, oh my goodness, when she was impressed or inspired or awed by something. That's just a great conversation. And I think we can learn so much from other disciplines, and we don't think about that and how we can apply it. So, Mark, I always like to ask my guests, what is the one thought you would like the audience to take away today? And if they'd like to reach out to you to learn more about the principles of Gong Fu or your legal work or your expertise in ethics, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, well, I'm just going to echo my Sifu, being on the ethics committee too. This is something that you've heard me talk about before, but I think if folks could just get back to, let's all try and be good people. That would be a good start, right? Let's just try and be good people, and we can continue to work on the other stuff.
Oh, and how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I'm at Rimon Law, mark.franco@rimonlaw.com, or you can go to our website, www.rimonlaw.com.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Mark. I was so excited when you suggested this topic, and this is our second episode in our 2026 AANHPI Month series. And we will have 2 other episodes coming out in late May and early June to bring awareness to this wonderful community who brings so much to our profession and our overall community here in the world. So thank you again for joining me, Mark.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I really had a lot of fun talking over these things with you.
Oh, great. Me too. Thank you. And I hope you come back.
Okay, sounds good.
That'd be wonderful. So we have to go rogue for now, but don't forget to subscribe or follow us on your favorite podcast service. We're on all of them because you don't want to miss any of these fantastic conversations like the one Mark and I just had. And if you would like to find this episode featuring Mark and share it with your friends and colleagues, go to our website, roguetulips.com, go to the podcast page, and you'll find the episode, and it's very easy to share it. So I encourage you to do that and check out our podcast episode library because we have over 300 episodes and there's still a lot to talk about. So hope you will check some of those out. And if you are interested in education in the area of ethics or CAE preparation, please check out our education page. We also are offering the Adaptive Leadership course through our Lead Forward Initiative program. So check that out. If you would like to learn more about how we can help your organization bloom outside the box, check out the services page and then let's have a conversation. And finally, if you want to know what's on my mind this week, and you never know what that might be, check out the blog page and sign up for our newsletter, and you won't miss any of the interesting articles that we share on the blog posts. So that's it for this week. On behalf of Mark and myself, we will see you next time. That's it for this week. I hope you really loved this episode as much as I did. Thanks for listening. Learn more about how our experience and knowledge at Rogue Tulips can give your organization the strategic edge to reach its goals. Check out our website at roguetulips.com. We'd love to talk with you and see how we can work together.